Hello and welcome to the Sprint 65 review. We're back to a 2-week sprint this time. Next slide, please. So as usual, I'll give the overview of the statistics. Carol will update us on the community, Jason on architecture, Dan on the classic UI, Chris on the service UI, Bronagh on the providers, Gregg M for automate, Gregg T on the platform, and Alberto on the API, and Chris on documentation. Next slide, please. All right, so this sprint we had 411 PRs merged across 131 repos. The repo count seems to be growing every time. We added a new repo this sprint, log decorator. I'm actually not even sure what that is. Maybe Jason can let us know what that is.
Yeah, Rich has been working on trying to extract some of the logging code that we had in our various projects so you can use them for smart state code. So this is a new gem that enhances logging on classes and models. So it'll be a Ruby gem once he gets it finished.
Cool. All right, next slide, please. Typical breakout, 39% bugs, 35% enhancements, and healthy sprinkling everywhere else. I think this pattern is pretty much staying consistent, so that's good. Next slide, please. Again, the sprint we dropped off. Last sprint was a 3-week sprint, so it was a little bit different. So it seems like the new norm is down in the low 400s. Don't quite know why. Can't put my finger on it. It may be that the re-architecture effort that has started is producing your pull requests because there's a lot of research going on. Maybe that's the cause. I guess we'll see once the re-architecture is completed in about a month or so. The research itself, I mean, not the re-architecture, whether these numbers will start going back up to normal. Next slide, please. Right, and here's the health report for the some of the key repositories. I don't see any significant movement on any of them except for actually Ansible Tower. The GPA score dropped a little bit. And I think there was some work in that repository around credentials or something. So it would be good to kind of just understand what we did there, why it dropped the score. Kubernetes score went up by 0.7, and the Azure guy, he went up. His score went up by 0.38, so that's quite a lot. Would be good to understand if that was a lot of refactoring or something else. If somebody has some clarity on that, maybe Bronagh does. That would be cool. Next slide, please. And over to Carol for the community update. Hello, Carol, can you hear us?
I'll cover for her. So we've moved to a 2-week coverage for the last week in ManageIQ. And once
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I don't know why my thing wasn't on, but anyway, so because now we are in the summer months, like last week I mentioned that we're doing the two weekly blog posts for ManageIQ in July and August, and then we'll go back to our regular weekly schedule in September. And I also actually just realized this morning that today marks exactly 1 year since our first last weekly ManageIQ post by Tim. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, really. So it's been a great year. We have a lot of amazing blog posts. So keep it up, and thanks to everybody who has contributed.
Carol, has that had an impact on community traffic on the website?
Yeah, we do get quite good number of visitors to the ManageIQ. Sorry, the last week posts. So people are reading them. Whether it's there are. I can share more numbers maybe in the future, but we do have nice traffic there. So.
Perfect. No, I just wanted to correlate the blog with traffic. That's all.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Very good.
All right. So this week I'm actually in Brno. For David has organized this 2.5-day workshop because we have actually had this Intel nuke NUCs for a few months now, and we've been bringing them to events and trying to have ManageIQ demos using them. However, the setup has always been a problem. Whenever we have problems, it'll take a while. We spent half of the day at the conference just trying to debug stuff and setting things up. So we want to have something more streamlined, more automated. So we have been working here in Brno to use Kickstart files and Ansible playbooks to make the installation and deployment easier. So that's who's speaking? Sorry. Anyway, we haven't progressed as much as we have liked to in these 2.5 days, but we still made some good solid progress. So hopefully after this and have that available for our events for the second half of the year. So I want to thank David for putting in a lot of time and effort on this, and big thanks to him. And also Pavel from QE, who has been helping us a lot with the networking side and also Ansible playbooks. All right, for the website, we have a few updates to make things more responsive, especially on mobile and tablets. So thanks to Eric for that. Continuing to improve our website to make things more usable. And then finally, like I said last time, we are planning for more events coming up, and that also means we have more swag items to consider. And if anybody has any requests or ideas, feel free to ping me. I'll actually be away for 3 weeks for summer holidays starting end of the week, but feel free to email me and I will try to gather them and let's have something cool for the next few months. So thank you for this, and next slide, please.
Okay, over to Jason.
Okay, on the architecture side of things, starting with Kubernetes efforts, Nick has been looking at how developers may want to run stuff locally when we're in a Kubernetes world, and they may not want to spin up a whole mini shift or have a whole OpenShift lab just to, get their code, build an image, run it on OpenShift, rinse, repeat. May just want to run some Ruby code locally or whatever. So he was looking at Foreman proc files, and the spike on that was pretty successful. He got it running completely on his laptop, where you can pick and choose essentially what workers you want to run, and they can run as separate processes, and then you could spin up a Rails console separately as well. What's nice is each of those commands that you would run independently map to the commands that you would run in a container. So there's a strong correlation between the two environments. And it may end up replacing the MIQ Spartan thing that we have, because you can very prescriptively describe which workers you want to run and how many. Brandon's been working on the dual deployment research. Dual deployment is where we may want to run ManageIQ. Well, we will run ManageIQ on top of OpenShift directly, but we still have to work in VMware environments and Rev environments. So the idea is that we would create VM container VM images that have Kubernetes inside or OpenShift inside of them, and so we have to install that on an appliance. So we're using the OpenShift Ansible installer, and he's been going through that effort to try to figure it out. It's been pretty bumpy right now, so he's trying to find bugs and get through some of those things, and hopefully he can get past all those issues. On the inventory side of things, Lattice was added batch saving without unique indexes to Kupernishvili. One of the things we've been doing is, as we've been seeing the different features that we've been creating, figuring out which ones can actually come back for the next release and actually help improve things ahead of time. So batch saving was one of those things. I say the without unique indexes because we're going to save the unique indexes for the later release where it might be a little bit more potentially problematic. But so we still get great savings on the batch side. The other thing he added was custom reconnect blocks for graph refresh. This is essentially custom find logic. So in most tables, you have like the one column which is like essentially the unique index. With some tables, we do interesting stuff. Like for VMs, we don't just look up by the ID. We also look up if the VM is moved from one provider to another. based on other columns. So this allows the refresh writers to add those custom blocks. We also, Adam and myself, have been working on an experimental SOAP and VMware library written in Crystal. The idea is we wanted to just quickly write something that was compiled down and see if we can do even better than the demo that he had, which got it down to like 150 meg, I think. We want to see if we can get it a little better and see what writing it in a different language would produce. So we did a quick spike on that, and we actually got a SOAP layer and a VMware communication layer written. We were able to log in and log out. And I think we got some basic commands going as well. So we're going to expand that a little more in this coming sprint and see how far we can get.
What's Crystal?
Crystal is a Ruby-like language in syntax, but it's fully compilable down to LLVM IR, which then it can use the LLVM compiler to go to native machine language. On the next slide. Adam, I'm going to have you talk about this one.
Yeah, so this was, like he was saying, an experiment pulling back some rearc work to 4.6. So in this case, I took that update-driven refresh code and put it behind a config variable to drop it into a current refresh worker and compare it to the way current refresh works. So rather than use the Vim broker for EMS inventory, we're using the RBVMOMI update-driven logic. And so we're able to cut out a lot of memory out of the Vim broker, in this case about half. We still need the Vim broker in 4.6 for EMS operations and connection brokering, but we were able to get the refresh memory usage down to about 50% and the duration down to almost half the time.
So this is going to come in 4.6?
Yeah, so the base code that actually does the collection and parsing is in, and one PR left outstanding that adds the config variable and adding it to a worker. So you can run it on a Rails console now, but probably next sprint you'll be able to run it in a worker.
And this is for VMware only?
Yeah.
It's VMware only. It uses the graph refresh code, which doesn't, it still needs a bit more work to handle the relationship trees. So this isn't like complete yet on the saving side, but the graph here just shows the collection side of things and the memory for just the collection half of it. The other thing is we're going to put it behind a prototype flag. So right now it's turned off by default.
This is good. The research is starting to bear fruit earlier than expected, which is good.
Next slide, please. On the metrics side of things, we're still investigating differences between technologies. Marcel has been looking at the different, Marcel and Chris Arcan have been looking at the storage differences between Elasticsearch and just Postgres with a JSON column. If we were to just rewrite our internal Postgres tables, but in a more flexible way, or using Elasticsearch, and just trying to understand if there's resiliency problems with Elastic or anything like that. So they're just investigating that, continuing to investigate that now. Gregg B and myself have been deep diving into the features that depend on the metrics data, just looking at every single place that we actually use them and figuring out what we can actually get rid of. Are people even using them? Just trying to get a deep analysis on every single thing. And we're about a quarter of the way through. So it's a lot of work, and we're just going to keep ripping through that. On the Q side of things, Bill has created a ManageIQ messaging repo that eventually will move over into the ManageIQ umbrella. This is an abstraction layer gem over the ActiveMQ Artemis client that allows us, as an abstraction layer, can allow us to switch between different types, should we need to in the future, types of clients. That is basically almost done, so that'll probably get transferred in the next, probably today. They've been doing some research on a container image for ActiveMQ Artemis. There's one in the community out there, but we're not quite sure it'll work for us. So just continuing to look at that. One of the other things, the last bullet there, we're also looking at is seeing if we can bring some of the ActiveMQ stuff back to Gaprindashvili. The idea being that if we can get some of those gains early, like we have tried to do on the inventory side, just at this point, we're just looking into what it would take, how much level of effort, and can we actually make it in the release cycle and still take on that possible risk. And that's it for the architecture stuff. Next slide, please.
Over to Dan.
Yep, this is Dan. You can see there our PR counts, and obviously still
mostly bugs, but you see some enhancements starting to come in for the G release. We're starting to actually get some the smaller ones done, and we are actually working pretty hard on other enhancements that you should see coming in the upcoming sprints. Some refactoring was done as well. We try to keep going forward on that. There were some Dynatree artifacts still left over. We finally got rid of all of those. Some other methods were refactored kind of on the UI back end. As far as technical debt, going to be a while, but we're trying to move constants out of UI constants, get them out of the core and into the UI repo. Minor changes. Actually, I think this was actually a feature that was asked for the G release, was to make the button text consistent, because when you're deleting stuff, a lot of times it was confusing. The user would think they were actually deleting the VM when they're really just removing it from the ManageIQ inventory. So made that clear everywhere. Some other code cleanup and unification in floating IP module. So that was done. Enhancements. Some are small, but they're very welcome. So close button for the notification drawer was very confusing to people. They would click on the bell to open it and then wouldn't realize you could click on the bell to close it. So added the close button. The physical infrastructure group added the physical servers information to their summary screen. And the Angular drag and drop editor, dialog editor, that we originally wrote in the Ops USI, moved to the Service UI, and then have decided to bring it back along with all the other automate customization stuff, has been re-edited back in. So I have some screenshots following. So next slide, please. Okay. Hard to spot that little X, but there it is now, and I tried it out, and it definitely is a lot easier to use. So good usability change, very easy to do. There's the screen on the top right of that bottom screen. There's relationships. You can see the physical servers and the physical servers that have a host. Next slide. Oh, that's made it in. Good. I added the slide at the last minute. We were going to have a demo. We'll have a demo next sprint. We had some issues with the API on the back end saving the dialogues. But what we've done is we put this drag and drop dialog editor right next to the one that currently exists, so that we can work on the gaps. There shouldn't be too many. We've identified just a few. So once we have all the gaps closed, we will remove the old dialog editor, but we'll demonstrate this again last time for those of you that missed it, probably 6 months ago when we first demoed it, and it has changed a little bit. But basically, you can see here, you can take items from your toolbox, drag them onto the dialogues, move things around, edit them, and everything and see the live view there on the left. So more to come on that. And that's it on the UI side. Over to Chris, I think.
Thanks, Dan. So before we get in, just a few sprint details. We completed 10 stories. Of those, excuse me, 5 were bugs, 4 were churs, and 2 were features. I think something got double counted there, which is why there's a discrepancy. Next slide, please. We've enabled a couple new features. We've added the ability to view generic objects in the SUI. So as soon as the API starts returning them, they'll start to show up in the services list. The conditional buttons have been enabled. So the buttons will only appear if certain conditions are true. For example, if the OS is Linux or if the OS is Windows. Again, that's pending the availability in the API. So we're still waiting for that. With the bugs, we fixed a couple issues that arose when we were updating the dependencies, and a few CSS issues that have kind of plagued us for a little bit, which prevented the viewing of certain screen elements. As for chores, our normal update of the dependencies. Normally for our build, we test under node 6, which is the LTS, and the latest, which is node 7. So we've stopped testing with node 7 and switched that to node 8, just to make sure it's still working. And that's it for the service UI. Bronagh?
All right, so today I'm going to share some updates from Azure, Ansible, Lenovo, Kubernetes, OpenStack, and Hawker. Next slide, please. So most pull requests this sprint came from the Kubernetes provider, followed jointly by Azure, OpenStack, and Overt repos, then Amazon and VMware. Next slide, please. So for Azure, we now gather an inventory of all the images in the Azure Marketplace, and we support provisioning an instance using these images. Conscious of the performance implications of gathering potentially thousands of public images, measures were put in place to filter which should be selected. So through the settings, we can filter by URN, which is the uniform resource name, or we can disable this feature entirely. And the same filtering is in place for Amazon. Then Dan introduced the ability to blacklist certain usernames and passwords from being configured during instance provisioning. This is the same blacklist used by Microsoft. Next slide, please. So for Ansible, when an Ansible playbook executes, it needs credentials to log into its targets. And in the final release, we supported 4 types of credentials. So in this sprint, James added support for the targets listed on this slide. And this brings us on a par with the credential types supported by Ansible Tower. So for Lenovo, now we have support for gathering an inventory of physical network adapters and their firmware. Next slide, please. And then for Kubernetes, metrics collection had been centered around Popular, but now we gather metrics from arbitrary sources. And then for OpenStack, performance improvements were made to how we find a default tenant. And just to define what a default tenant is in OpenStack, some queries are not specific to a single tenant. For example, get me all the instances across all tenants. But the default call to the OpenStack API still requires a tenant. And so in those cases, we default to the admin tenant if it exists, and the default tenant if it does not. So previously, we would iterate over every tenant to see which ones could be accessed and which ones could not. But as of this sprint, we return after the first success. And then finally, for middleware, if 2 separate ManageIQ setups, each with their own database, are connected to the same Hawkular instance, and an alert is created in each setup, a trigger collision was possible. So to fix this, the Hawkular team now include the region and the EMS ID and the trigger ID to ensure uniqueness. And that's it for providers. Over to Gregg McCullough.
Thank you. So for the Automate team this sprint, I think we did our part in helping keep the PR count low. I'm going to assume is a good thing. But we got a couple of enhancements, a couple of bugs in. On the enhancement side, we've been working towards a container template provisioning, have a demo of that. And then we've been working with the V2V team. I know Tina's been spending a decent amount of time working with them, getting not only some of the features of V2V cleaned up, but there was a nasty bug that came up, so we've been working to resolve that. So yeah, we got the little extra driver support in. And then a couple of bugs that we got resolved in this sprint was one around if you're using Git domains in Automate, resetting or refreshing those, you would lose the verify SSL flag and then connection issues. And then for retirement or orchestration stacks, we weren't honoring zones, so those could run in the wrong zone. Not, they should run next to the provider. There are a few other things in the sprint that I did want to point out. For that, things that either were progressed in the sprint but didn't lead to PRs. We're continuing to do around the template provisioning, some refactoring. Right now, the stuff is at base models, and we want to move those into provider-specific locations. So there's a number of PRs around that activity. And then last night, according to my Skype message, Drew B had a major breakthrough in the Ansible module side. He's been researching and working a lot on there to be able to take the token that we pass in through the extra bars and have a module know about that token further down. It was kind of a scoping issue, so he finally found a way to actually be able to detect and use that token without the user having to know and pass it into the call. So the idea would be they could pass username and password if they wanted to connect, but by default we would rely on the token that we pass in as part of our service processing. So that was great to hear. And then Madhu revived some work he did around MIQ expressions, and I'm hoping that we'll have that in the next sprint. It's an automate method that will run an MIQ expression and pull in a list of objects, and then you can format it. The goal was to use it around dialog fields. Instead of running a Ruby method, which is a kind of a heavyweight process, it just runs an expression, pulls back the objects, and builds the variables you want. So the only thing holding that up right now was import-export. We had some discussions around how to properly save that in the export. So that should be ready. But then let me jump over to the demo for container templates. Lucy has been working on this feature and put together a demo for us. So it jumps into the container area, obviously selects our template. I might have to slow this down a little bit. So the key thing here, the parameters, a little hard to read in the room here, but we generate a dialog for these, and we use the parameter set to build the fields for the dialog as well as using the values. And then there's a required field which has multiple settings, what obviously true, but they can also have a auto-generated setting. So if you leave it blank, the system will provide a value for you for things like passwords or whatever. They can all be auto-generated. So we take all that into account. Here we go. And same thing we do for all the other template provisionings. We create a dialog based off the template, you pulling in those parameters. And then in the service area for a catalog item, we have a new item type, so container template. And then from here, it's the same workflow as any of the orchestration template provisionings. You provide a catalog, the dialog. Once you select the provider, it will show you the templates that are available there. And then the default entry point for provisioning is all you need. So now we'll run that, and you'll see the dialog here in a second. Real quick. So it defaults to the options that were in the template. You can modify that dialog and change those, but that's what we do. And at the top, you can either pick an existing project to add it to, or enter a new project name, which is what we're doing here. And submit that. And then, like any good demo, we'll switch over to the terminal. All right. It gets auto approved. Starts running it. So we're going through here, starting. Yeah, it basically sends the request really quick, and then we're just in the check complete state. So jumping over to OpenShift, here's our new project that we created, and you can drill down, and it was hard to see from the dialog, but we picked up the changes in the dialog, right? Back to the terminal, it successfully completes here in a second. And back to our UI, which shows that the request completed successfully here. A refresh. And there you go. That's container template provision.
That's actually pretty cool because you tied together the CloudForm service catalog, leveraging Ansible to provision something in OpenShift. So that's really cool.
Low H should be happy.
It's recorded, so I cannot show too much excitement.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
All right, and that's it from Automate. So
It's hard to follow that.
now it's you can do it.
Okay.
But watching.
Okay, so on the platform side, fairly even between enhancements and bugs this go around. Starting to get more enhancements as we start working on the G release. I'll talk about some of the ones that stand out. So on the chargeback side, Libor added an optional calculation that you can do for allocated costs by using the average of the metrics. We had maybe about half a year ago changed those calculations to use the max over the period, and that wasn't optimal for some of the users. So this is optional. You can switch to going back to averages, which is what we had in the past. It's only in the back end right now. There's a PR that he has on the UI side that should get merged soon, and then there'll be a selection for that when you create a chargeback report. And Loic should be happy about that one too. So this is a real back end thing, but we changed the format of the application name and that we register when we make this connection to Postgres. So our intern Bo did that one. Actually, his name's going to come up on a bunch of these things. Been doing a lot of work. So this is part of something that we're going to be using to build diagnostics around SQL connections. How long they're holding connections for, idle connections, locks, building a lock tree, and even be able to use some of this stuff to be able to do diagnostics when the database or the application's in a degraded state. And he's working on that stuff. This is also very useful anyway, even without those tools, because from the Postgres side, you can see with this format here, you can see which servers, which workers are holding the connection and tie them back to the actual processes that are running on the appliances and where they are, and maybe even figure out which logs you need to look at if there's some kind of an issue. So, and this builds on the work that LJ started. This was already in there, but this format is going to make it easier for machine to be machine readable, so that we can write these diagnostics. And then the Puma gem was updated to 3.7, basically for Fedora 2.6, because of a requirement of SSL 1.1. So if anyone notices issues with that, let us know. On the bug fix side, a couple of blocker fixes for IPv6. So Nick opened the firewall rules to allow an appliance to receive DHCP IPv6 address. Firewall was preventing that. You could configure DHCP for IPv6. And also, there was kind of a glitch where if you configured DHCP successfully and then wanted to switch over to static IPv6, it wouldn't let you do that, so that was fixed. And then this was probably, I guess, a bigger blocker, kind of a nasty bug for embedded Ansible, although it's a bit of an edge case. But you can get to a state where if the embedded Ansible fails to do its setup initially, it takes too long, you expose a potential thread leak where multiple worker threads were being created and actually using up the connection pool connections. And there's like a whole chain of events that would actually lead to the cached version of MIQ server to return a nil, causing all the other workers to not be able to start up. And it was a difficult one. You know, when you start out with like the aftermath of that, to work backwards and figure out like what the cause was. But Nick, LJ, Jason, and myself spent a lot of time figuring that one out. And as fallout from that, some work was done to make the basically the monitor thread that is overseeing the embeddable Ansible processes that get started up, making sure they are exiting gracefully when we ask them to stop. And then a small fix to central admin, but the important one that Yuri made. We weren't showing service requests that should have been visible to a user in the global region that was created in the lower regions. That was more the same type of work that we've done with other things where like ownership of users and groups in the global region, where we use the name of the user or group to correlate across the information that we have for the multiple regions that are replicated up into the global. And yep, that's all I have for platform. Turn it over to Alberto.
Thanks, Greg.
So for the API, we had a couple of enhancements that came in the sprint. The first one by Jillian. So when we search resources to filter by tag, there was a need to search on multiple tags. So in this example, we have the by tag parameter, but you can have them comma separated. So you can look at for all the resources that have both, two or more tags there. So that was by Jillian. Next slide, please. Okay, we have a couple of enhancements that came in by Gilles. So this is adding support for floating IPs and network routers. So we have new primary collections, API floating IPs. Here we're querying the collection, getting an individual resource, as well as the bulk queries that we support. And same thing for network routers, API network routers, same thing. Querying the collection, a resource, and bulk queries. And that's it for the API.
All right, over to Chris on documentation.
Hi, for this sprint, we had a total of 27 PRs merged, 23 of which were enhancements, 4 were bug fixes. The highlights among them you can see in the list include updating the instructions on installing ManageIQ on OpenShift container platform, corrected T-SQL instructions for introducing failed nodes, added content on the force option for cloud volume backups, updating content on ports in the appliance hardening guide to improve SEO, and content on how to configure access to VNC consoles. We've added a procedure outlining how to perform binary backups, and content on services and catalog items to clarify the workflow. That's it.
Chris, do those documentation updates, get updated to the website immediately, or there's a lag, or what's the? When would people see it there?
They should. I believe anything that isn't for a forthcoming release will be published to the site. I can verify that though, so let me do that.
Yeah, maybe for next time, if you could just find out what the flow is and what the time is, that would be helpful, I think, too.
Yeah, sure thing. I believe it's automated. I mean, we can publish on our own, but I do think it automates. It publishes like at least once a day, but I will verify that for next week.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem.
All right, so that concludes our Sprint 65 review. The next one is going to be in 2 weeks. Dan, Harpreet, and I will be in Brno doing it there. And if there's any questions or comments, take them now. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you to everyone for another healthy sprint. It amazes me how much actually gets accomplished each time. So thank you to everyone, and let's move forward to make Geprindashvili a solid release.
God bless you.
Easy. Get used to it.